"You're being watched," she whispered. Not with fear, not with hesitation, but with the kind of quiet certainty that only comes from knowing too much and saying it anyway. The words hung in the air like static, cutting through the soft hum of technology in Elliot Grant's Austin home office. He froze mid-keystroke, the rhythm of his fingers stilled by the unsettling calm in his niece's voice. The late afternoon sun spilled through the glass walls behind him, casting long lines of gold across the walnut shelves and stainless steel accents. Everything about the room was curated, elegant, deliberate. But in that moment, none of it felt safe. None of it felt his. Arya stood by the door, just barely tall enough to peek over the edge of his desk. 10 years old, sock-footed, her wild curls haloed by the light behind her. She wasn't the kind of child people noticed immediately. She wasn't loud or precocious. She watched, she listened, and she remembered. A silent observer in a world full of noise. Her hand pointed toward the painting above Elliot's bookshelf, a stylized cityscape gifted to him by Lauren, his fiancée. He'd always found it tasteful, even oddly soothing. Until now. "There's a camera behind it," Arya said, voice low. "It's not yours." Elliot's breath caught in his chest. The idea felt absurd for a second, and then it didn't. In the 6 months since the accident that took Araya's parents, his brother and sister-in-law, she had barely spoken a full paragraph. But she had devoured every book, every tutorial, every tool he placed in front of her. She had absorbed everything like a sponge and apparently built her own understanding of the digital world, one that had just outpaced his own. She had scanned the room using her tablet, ran a network trace, detected an unfamiliar signal. That wasn't paranoia. That was process. And Elliot, CEO of Neurofold Systems, a cybersecurity firm trusted by both Fortune 500 companies and federal agencies, knew better than to dismiss process. He stood slowly, like the weight of her words had altered gravity itself, crossed the room, lifted the painting from the wall. His hands trembled as the frame gave way. Embedded in the molding, nearly invisible, was a lens no larger than the tip of a pen. But it wasn't the size that stunned him. It was the implication. Someone had been watching, listening, recording. And if Arya hadn't spoken, he never would have known. "You've been carrying this by yourself?" he asked, finally turning to her. She nodded. Her eyes didn't flinch. "I didn't think you believed me." He did now. More than he believed anything. And in that one moment, Elliot understood something vital. This wasn't just a breach of privacy. It was a betrayal of trust. And the warning hadn't come from a system alert or a firewall breach. It had come from a child, his niece, who saw what he couldn't. That's where the story really begins. The truth didn't arrive with a crash. It came quietly like a draft beneath a sealed door. As Elliot stood there, staring at the tiny, unblinking lens hidden inside the elegant frame, his pulse slowed into something heavy. He wasn't just being watched. He'd been studied, recorded, dissected in silence. And it wasn't done by a stranger peering through a window or a hacker hiding behind a screen. It was done by someone who kissed his forehead at night and knew how he liked his coffee. Lauren, she had done this. She'd brought the painting into his life in a soft white box tied with a navy ribbon. "Your office needs something warm," she'd said with that knowing smile, half gentle, half performative. He remembered how she made a joke about how men with hardwood desks and fiber optic lighting always forget the human touch. He'd laughed. He'd let her hang it herself. She had insisted on placing it just above the bookshelf, perfectly centered between his collection of first edition security texts and the preserved chess set from his late father. He hadn't seen it as surveillance, but now the whole room felt rigged, choreographed, artificial. He backed away from the wall, his breathing thin and mechanical. "Where else?" he asked, voice low. Arya didn't speak right away. She stood still, hands clasped around her tablet like it was a shield. Her eyes met his, wide but calm. "5 others," she said. "In the den, the guest bedroom, the living room, and your master suite." Elliot blinked. His bedroom. "Each one transmits for about 5 to 7 minutes," she continued, "usually between midnight and 4 a.m. They go dark in the morning." His throat tightened. That wasn't just surveillance. That was extraction. Scheduled, methodical. Whoever placed those devices wasn't checking in, they were harvesting. "And you're sure they're not ours?" he asked. She nodded. "I ran all the MAC addresses. None of them match our network registry. I also checked against your company-issued signals. These are rogue nodes piggybacking on our mesh but operating off a hidden VLAN. Elliot nearly smiled, but the weight of it all held his face firm. She was 10 years old and already had a sharper mind for threat detection than half his R&D staff. Lauren. He sat down slowly on the edge of the leather sofa, his hands gripping the sides as if the room might tilt. He tried to picture her not, the Lauren in the abstract, but the real one. The woman who moved through his home with such grace, who always knew when to bring him chamomile instead of coffee, who remembered the name of every board member's child. That Lauren, she didn't feel real anymore. She had kissed him under that painting, whispered she was proud of him. Now he realized she had probably been counting on the echo in her earpiece more than the warmth in her voice. The betrayal was surgical. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't stormed. She hadn't threatened or stolen files outright. No, she had slipped under his defenses like smoke, had embedded herself in the rhythms of his life, his routines, his passwords, his blind spots. It wasn't just a violation of trust. It was an exploitation of intimacy. Aria was still standing waiting for him to process. She didn't prod him, didn't fidget. She just waited, like she knew he'd get there, on his own terms. "How long have you known?" he asked finally. 3 days, she said. "I didn't say anything at first. I thought maybe you knew. Maybe it was for work. Or maybe you wouldn't believe me." He looked up at her. "But you still told me." "Because it got worse," she said. "There was a signal spike last night, stronger than usual. It felt like they were pulling a lot at once. So I checked. And it wasn't just one source. It was multiple." His thoughts raced. She hadn't acted out of fear. She'd acted out of pattern recognition, intuition, evidence. She'd trusted her gut, something he, with all his experience, had failed to do. Elliot stood again and crossed the room, eyes scanning every corner, every lamp, every photo frame. He could feel it now. The wrongness, the watching, like his home had become a theater, and he was the only one who hadn't realized he was on stage. He returned to his desk, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a black velvet pouch. Inside was a small device, one he hadn't used in years. A network sniffer and scanner. Not company issue, not traceable. Something from his early days when he still did penetration testing himself. He plugged it into the port beneath the desk and handed the monitor to Aria. "You see anything odd, flag it immediately." She nodded, already navigating the interfaces like a pro. "I'll run the physical sweep," he said. "No stone unturned." And he did. He tore through his own house like a man auditing his soul, checked under tables, inside bookshelves, beneath rugs, behind vent grills. What he found wasn't a nest of wires or blinking lights. It was worse. He found silence, cleanliness, precision. Everything was too tidy, too untouched. The way Lauren had insisted on helping him tidy up. The way she always seemed to be around when he stepped away. The way she lingered after dinner alone in his office, under the pretense of reading his latest brief. It had never felt suspicious until now. And then it clicked. She hadn't just been gathering data, she'd been engineering control, predicting behavior, steering his workflow, gaining access not through brute force, but through trust. That night, after Aria had fallen asleep on the couch, tablet still glowing dimly in her hands, Elliot sat at his desk and wrote down one word on a post-it note entry. Because this wasn't just a betrayal. It was an entry point, not just into his home, but into his company, his core systems, his future. He stuck the note to his monitor and leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. Tomorrow, he wouldn't just be a man trying to protect his house. He would become the architect of a takedown. And the woman he thought he'd marry, she had no idea what was coming. By sunrise, Elliot wasn't the same man who had sat frozen in front of his monitor the day before. Something inside him had snapped into focus, cold, deliberate, methodical. The same qualities that had built his cybersecurity empire were now weaponized, aimed inward. And Lauren was no longer just a fiancée. She was a threat. At 6:14 a.m., she walked through the front door like nothing had changed, carrying her usual soy latte, humming an old Nora Jones tune under her breath. Her heels clicked across the hardwood floor with rhythm, her smile warm rehearsed. "Morning, love," she said, leaning in to kiss his cheek. Elliot let her. He didn't flinch. He'd built walls taller than this woman could ever scale, and right now he needed her exactly where she thought she had the upper hand. "You're up early," she added, slipping off her coat. "Couldn't sleep, just sorting through some diagnostics," he said, gesturing to his screen. "System's been acting odd." She glanced at the monitor with a flicker of concern. Too brief, too performative. "Anything serious?" "Not sure yet," he said smoothly. "Might do a full system reset later." "That sounds smart." She walked behind him, hand grazing his shoulder, casual but strategic. She lingered for a second too long by the side drawer, the one that now held the hard drive with her own transgressions backed up in triplicate. He noticed every motion, every shift in her weight, every subconscious cue. She was watching him the way a thief watches a security guard, carefully waiting for a blind spot. Except Elliot didn't have blind spots anymore. Not with Arya beside him. Not now. When Lauren left the office to take a call in the sunroom, Elliot picked up his cell and texted Maria, his housekeeper, and one of the few people left he trusted without reservation. "Bring the package. Back entrance." No words. 10 minutes later, Maria appeared with a manila envelope tucked beneath a grocery bag. She gave a tight nod and vanished down the hallway without ever making eye contact. Inside the envelope were photos stolen by a private lens she had installed in the den 6 weeks ago after noticing Lauren and Elliot's CFO Darren whispering during one of his supposed casual drop-ins. Lauren didn't know Maria had caught them, but Elliot did now. He flipped through the photos slowly, each one more damning than the last. Lauren leaning into Darren's shoulder, a silver briefcase exchanging hands, a smirk between them when they thought they were alone. It wasn't business. It wasn't friendship. It was collusion. And Darren, he was the one person Elliot had trusted longer than anyone, his CFO since the company's founding, the best man at his brother's wedding godfather to Arya. "How deep does this go?" Elliot murmured. The answer came sooner than expected. At 9:32 a.m., Darren let himself in, using his executive access code, completely unaware he was walking into a live surveillance zone. "Hey man," Darren said, casual as ever, holding up a thumb drive. "Thought I'd drop off the quarterly revisions. Saw a couple errors in the projections, figured it'd flag him." Elliot forced a tight smile. "Appreciate that." They stood face-to-face, old friends, or at least a performance of it. "You seen Lauren yet?" Darren asked. "She's around." Darren nodded, tossed the drive on Elliot's desk, and began to back out of the room. "Wait," Elliot said. His voice had changed, lower, firmer, almost surgical. Darren paused mid-step. "Yeah, you still think I'm not watching?" Darren turned slowly, a flicker of confusion breaking his confident FUD. What Elliot hit a key on his laptop. The office monitor sprang to life, displaying grainy but unmistakable footage. Darren and Lauren in the den, the silver case, the handoff, the USB. Darren froze. "I trusted you," Elliot said. "I let you into my house, into my life, and you used that to gut the company we built together." Elliot, wait, it's not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like. Darren took a step forward, hands raised, but Maria appeared in the doorway behind him, this time not as a housekeeper but as a witness, calm, composed, unmoving. Lauren returned just seconds later, voice light and airy. "What's going on?" she asked. Then she saw the screen and her face shattered into something darker, defensive, cornered. Elliot turned to both of them. "You bugged my house. You fed proprietary files to offshore accounts. You staged meetings and called it loyalty." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Every word landed like a scalpel. Lauren opened her mouth, maybe to lie, maybe to beg, but he cut her off with a gesture. "I'm not calling the police." She blinked. "I already did." Before either could move, two plainclothes federal agents stepped into the office from the back hallway, members of a quiet task force Elliot had worked with during his advisory years with Homeland Cyber Defense. They produced warrants, asked no questions. Lauren was too stunned to speak. Darren tried to protest, but it was useless. They were both let out in cuffs. Still, Elliot didn't feel relief. He felt clarity. This wasn't the end. It was the first rupture in a larger web. Behind Lauren's betrayal was a bigger shadow. This wasn't just a personal breach. It was industrial espionage, a carefully orchestrated takedown, staged through emotion, trust, and proximity. And now Elliot knew this wasn't about revenge. This was about dismantling an entire machine. He turned back to his desk where Arya now sat on the armrest of the leather chair, hugging her knees, watching everything. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Are you?" He didn't answer. Not right away. But then he sat beside her and whispered, "Now I am." Because the people who had tried to use love as a weapon had just lost their greatest advantage, surprise, and Elliot Grant had just begun to fight back. By nightfall, Elliot Grant wasn't mourning what he had lost. He was blueprinting what came next. Gone was the man trying to piece together betrayal. What remained was the architect of consequence, building something stronger in the ruins. Revenge wasn't the goal. Control was. The estate was quiet. Lauren and Darren were in federal custody. Arya was asleep upstairs, her bedroom door cracked open, just enough for the hallway light to spill in. But Elliot didn't rest. He sat in the study light's dimmed fingers, tapping rhythmically on the armrest of his leather chair. Every betrayal leaves behind a scent, a signature, and he intended to follow it. He opened a drawer under his desk and pulled out a device he hadn't touched in years, an unregistered offline laptop built during his early fieldwork in network infiltration. No backdoors, no cloud sync. No one else had the password. From a locked cabinet, he retrieved a series of drives, archives, fail-safes, digital breadcrumbs from the last 6 months. He had a feeling now that Lauren's efforts weren't limited to his home. Her questions about neural mesh protocols, her unusual interest in Project Vertex, her subtle probes about timelines and rollout dates. At the time, he'd chalked it up to curiosity. Now it looked a lot like espionage. He connected the drive, booted the device, and began to piece together activity logs. Lauren had never accessed anything directly from the company server, smart for that, but she had watched, memorized patterns, predicted behavior, and more dangerously influenced his workflow. Where she couldn't hack the system, she had manipulated the operator. He clicked through time-stamped notes from his personal terminal, details she could have seen just by standing behind him at the right moment. And she had done that too. Often. He cross-referenced that with unusual file access timestamps over the past month, pings that came during his lunch breaks, his workout hours, moments when he was predictably away from his desk. Moments when she was conveniently alone in the house. There was a trail, not obvious, not crude, but traceable. Suddenly the stakes shifted again. Lauren hadn't been freelancing. She was part of something larger, a network, a syndicate, maybe even a competitor. And Elliot's company, Neurofold Systems, was the prize. He picked up his encrypted sat phone and dialed a number from memory. It rang once. Then Reed, the voice answered gruff, clipped ex-military. "I need you," Elliot said. "Tonight." There was no pause. "Address, you know it. Team 3 Max. No uniforms. Quiet work. Understood." The line went dead. Reed was a former Black Ops operative Elliot had worked with on cyber warfare projects during his early contracting years. He didn't deal in morality. He dealt in outcomes. And tonight the outcome Elliot needed was clarity. An hour later, a matte black SUV rolled silently into the estate's rear driveway. Reed and 2 men stepped out, each one carrying slim silver cases and eyes that didn't blink without calculation. By midnight, they had converted the estate's guest house into a mobile command station. Thermal sensor signal interceptors, satellite uplinks, and audio analysis boards lined the walls. Elliot briefed them fast. Lauren wasn't working alone. "There's more. I want to know who's upstream. I want everything that touched this network flagged, mapped, and traced." Reed nodded. "You expecting retaliation?" Elliot's voice was ice. "I'm counting on it." While Reed's team dug through mirrored backups and ghost traces of the stolen files, Elliot returned to the main house. Arya was waiting in the hallway wrapped in a blanket, her eyes sharp despite the hour. "I heard the SUV," she said softly. He knelt in front of her. "You're supposed to be asleep." She gave him a look. He sighed. "Okay, you win." "Are they here to help?" He nodded. "We're not just reacting anymore. We're setting the board." Arya looked thoughtful. Then I want to help too. He studied her. This isn't a game, Arya. I know, but you told me once that good code is like a story. It always leads somewhere. Let me follow the story. He hesitated, then stood and held out his hand. Come on, let's write the next chapter. Back in the command unit, Arya sat beside Reed, her small fingers flying over a borrowed keyboard. She wasn't just a passenger in this fight, she was a prodigy in motion. While Reed's men scanned external IP traffic, Arya mapped internal anomalies, minor shifts in packet frequency, hidden handshakes, time delays that human eyes would miss. Here, she said, pointing to a cluster of server logs. This isn't from Lauren. This is coming from inside the company. Look at the access tokens. These were issued by the dev team. Reed raised an eyebrow. You telling me we've got an internal leak at Neurofold? Elliot's jaw tensed. She wasn't just here to spy on me. She was here to lay groundwork. He leaned over Arya's shoulder and zoomed into the signature code strings. This is someone inside the product engineering team, someone high enough to avoid detection. Reed nodded. That's a whole different war. Elliot looked up, eyes hardened into resolve. Then we fight it differently. That night, while the rest of the city slept beneath the illusion of security, Elliot Grant rewrote the battlefield. He wasn't reacting anymore. He was baiting, controlling, watching. They had underestimated him. They had counted on emotion. But now he was in his element. And for the first time since Lauren whispered false love beneath a camera's gaze, Elliot wasn't playing defense. He was building the trap. The trap wasn't going to be a snare. It was going to be an invitation. By morning, the entire estate was wired into a controlled simulation. Every keystroke, every data transfer, every phone call Elliot made for the next 24 hours would be part of a masterfully engineered lie. This wasn't about patching the breach anymore. This was about weaponizing it. He didn't have to look far for bait. Neurofold Systems had a crown jewel project, Vertex, a next-generation predictive AI module designed to map and anticipate human behavior in complex digital ecosystems. It wasn't even public yet. Only 6 people in the company knew it existed. Lauren shouldn't have known, but she did. So Elliot turned the project into his chessboard. The plan was simple: build a fake version of Vertex hide tracking beacons inside the code, inject misinformation into the log structure, and push it into the one place where he was certain the enemy would come, looking, his own desktop. Make it visible, he told Reed, but just messy enough that they think I've slipped up. Reed's team got to work. They embedded unique trace signature Seek1 with a digital fingerprint that would identify who downloaded, duplicated, or even opened the file. The code wasn't just bait. It was a forensic landmine. Meanwhile, Arya designed the project's decoy interface. She called it Butterfly Stinga Sleek UI, that mirrored the real architecture but carried embedded tripwires hidden within the GUI. It looks too polished, Reed commented, peering over her shoulder. It's supposed to, Arya replied, typing rapidly. If they think it's unfinished, they'll hesitate. If they think it's perfect, they'll take it right away. Elliot smiled faintly, just like Lauren did with me. By mid-afternoon, the system was live. The fake Vertex prototype appeared on Elliot's screen under a folder titled NMAI Framework. Final build. It was time-stamped just hours earlier. Intentional, tempting, impossible to resist. Then they waited. Elliot made sure to behave just like he always did. He took his scheduled lunch. He made a public call to his head of infrastructure about a project delay. He intentionally left his workstation idle with the folder open on the second monitor. Across the room, a hidden camera captured everything, and at 4:17 p.m. she struck. Lauren, released on bail less than 24 hours, prioritized a private connection to access Elliot's system remotely. Not through her old credentials, those had been revoked. She came in through a third-party analytics tool Elliot had forgotten to revoke access to. Exactly as planned. The bait file was accessed, scanned, copied, then funneled into an offshore server cluster disguised under a holding company based in the Caymans. The entire trail lit up on Reed's monitoring system like a Christmas tree. They took the whole thing, Reed said. Signal confirms off-site movement. Any sign of internal triggers, Elliot asked. Arya turned from her console. 2 more access points just activated. One from inside Neurofold's San Francisco office. One from a satellite office in Berlin. They weren't just watching. They were moving. Fast. Elliot leaned over the console, scanning the digital fingerprints they'd embedded. This isn't just an extraction. They're going to launch it under another name. Make it look like we copied them. A preemptive strike, Reed muttered. Classic black flag. Elliot nodded. Then we let them run with it. Reed looked up. You're going to let them steal the whole framework. I'm going to let them think they did, Elliot said. Meanwhile, our version stays locked in cold storage. And when their version goes public filled with our signatures, we detonate. Arya glanced between them. And what about the people inside our company? Elliot's face hardened. We catch them in the act. The plan had 3 stages. Let the network steal the decoy. Track every hand it passed through. Trigger the embedded sting code the moment it touched an external system. That code would activate a cascade of failsafes. Not only would it shut down the stolen module, it would also send a callback ping revealing the user's identity IP device, ID, and most importantly, the path they used to get it. It was more than a trap. It was a confession machine. That night, Elliot returned home and found Araya still awake in the guesthouse command unit, her fingers moving over the keyboard like a concert pianist. He set a cup of cocoa beside her. You should sleep, he said gently. I will, she murmured, once I see them fall for it. Elliot looked at the wall of monitors, pulsing with activity routes traced in real-time threads, lighting up across Europe, Asia, and North America. She had every right to see it. At 11:03 p.m., the central beacon pinged. They launched it, Reed said. The codes live in their demo environment. Seconds later, Araya's custom GUI flashed red. Trigger confirmed, she said. They opened the file. Signature is active. Sting protocol running. One by one, identities emerged on screen shadow accounts, shell firms, dummy registrars, and 2 Neurofold employees using private tunnels from secure dev rooms. Elliot exhaled slowly. You just watch them indict themselves. The room fell into silence, filled only with the hum of server fans and the occasional click of Arya's keyboard. It was done. They had taken the bait. They had exposed themselves. And they didn't even know it yet. Tomorrow, Elliot would walk into the Neurofold boardroom files and hand names ready. But tonight he looked at Arya. You did that. She looked back at him, eyes wide. We did. And for the first time in days, Elliot let himself feel it, not vengeance, not anger, but justice. Because this time the watchers had been watched. And the quietest voice in the room was the one that brought the truth into the light. By morning, the fallout had already begun. At 8:06 a.m., Beavis Capital's encrypted internal servers went dark. By 8:13, 3 of its top executives received subpoenas. By 8:25, an anonymous leak hit 3 major tech outlets, TechRift, The Verge, and Wired Finance. The headline was short, brutal, and world-shifting. Corporate espionage ring exposed, AI giant infiltrated from inside. Attached to the report were names, access logs, time-stamped digital fingerprints, and a timeline so meticulous it looked like it had been prepared by a federal task force. But it hadn't. It had been built by Elliot Grant, in partnership with a 10-year-old girl. While the press scrambled and social media erupted with speculation, Elliot walked through the front entrance of Neurofold's Manhattan headquarters, not as a man under scrutiny, but as one prepared to stand in the fire and tell the truth. The glass doors closed behind him with a hiss, sealing out the noise of the outside world. Upstairs, the boardroom was already packed. Executives, legal, PR, even 2 shadowy men from an unnamed compliance task force Elliot recognized instantly as government liaisons. The air buzzed with tension, confusion, and quiet panic. He walked in calmly, a black folio tucked beneath his arm. Behind him, Reed entered with a secure hard case. No one spoke. Elliot stood at the head of the table. You've all seen the news, he began. What you haven't seen is how deep it goes. Not just Beavis Capital, not just a bad hire. This was systemic infiltration, and it nearly cost us everything. The room went still. I'm going to walk you through the timeline, the methods used, and the people involved. And then I'm going to ask you all a question. one that every company will be asking themselves in the next 6 months. He opened the folio and laid out hard evidence, screenshots, timestamps, snippets of stolen code embedded with traceable beacons, names of shell companies, VPN chains, and finally, the two internal Neurofold developers whose access patterns had matched the Sting signature. A murmur spread through the room as their photos appeared on screen. "How did we miss this?" someone whispered. "Because they weren't stealing files," Elliot said. "They were leaking behavior. They were shaping decisions, timing product announcements, creating artificial lags. And while we were focused on external threats, they were rewriting our narrative from the inside." He paused. "They were never after money. They were after credibility. They wanted us discredited, made obsolete, replaced. And who are they?" asked Ellen Marks, the company's COO. Elliot turned to the screen behind him. It flickered once, then loaded the real answer. A name. Monarch. Not a company, not an individual. A code name used in internal comms between Lauren Darren and higher-level handlers. A name linked to offshore firms, hidden networks, and now international charges of cyber sabotage. "They've built networks across dozens of startups," Elliot continued, "using trust as a weapon, using relationships as doors. Lauren wasn't just spying. She was embedding." Ellen leaned back. "What do we do now?" Elliot didn't hesitate. "We expose everything. We don't spin. We don't deny. We own the truth and let the world see how it was nearly destroyed from within. But our stock will recover," he said. "Reputation won't if we hide." He turned to Reed, who opened the secure case and distributed redacted but verifiable files to legal and compliance teams. "We're launching a company-wide audit. Every division, every device, every line of code deployed in the last 12 months. Full transparency. We'll even let third-party investigators in." The room was silent, no resistance, because they knew trying to cover this up would bury them faster than the truth. After the meeting, Elliot stepped into his private office. Arya was waiting on the leather couch sipping cocoa and sketching quietly on her tablet. Her hair was tucked into a hoodie that was 2 sizes too big. She looked up as he entered. "They believed you?" she asked. He nodded. "They didn't have a choice. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could." "Good," she said, and went back to sketching. "What happens next? We build," he said. "Smarter, cleaner, with firewalls made of more than just code." He walked over and looked at her screen. She was drawing a butterfly again, but this time the wings were made of overlapping lines of code-scripted, fragile, powerful. "Still thinking about butterfly sting?" he asked. "I was thinking we should rename it," she said without looking up. "To what, Arya?" she whispered. "Because it's small, but it sings." Elliot smiled, but there was weight in his eyes. Because this wasn't just a breach or a scandal, it was a reminder that even the smartest people in the room can be blind, that silence can be louder than shouting, and that sometimes the smallest voice is the one holding the biggest truth. Later that day, the Justice Department announced a joint investigation into Monarch-linked entities. International warrants were issued. More companies came forward, each with similar stories. Stolen prototypes, compromised boardrooms, strategic leaks made to look like incompetence. Neurofold wasn't alone, but they were the first to strike back publicly. And Elliot didn't stop there. He launched the ARIA Initiative, a cybersecurity education fund for orphan youth with talent and potential. Because he told the press no one should have to be a genius in the shadows to be heard. The story made headlines. So did the little girl who'd found the first camera. They didn't publish her last name. They didn't have to. Everyone just called her the girl who saw what others missed. And for once, the tech world didn't cheer the algorithm. It cheered the instinct. The child who trusted her gut. The man who finally listened. Because in a world so obsessed with what can be measured, this story reminded people of something else. That sometimes what really saves us isn't what we build, but who we believe. The media storm faded. The subpoenas were filed. The traitors were prosecuted. But the house was still too quiet. Elliot Grant sat at the piano in his study, the same upright piece that had been in the family for decades, passed down like a relic from a simpler time. He hadn't touched it in years. Not since his brother's funeral. Not since he became Ariah's guardian and stopped playing anything that didn't feel absolutely necessary. Now he placed his fingers on the keys. No fanfare, no sheet music, just instinct. A soft melody rose, hesitant like breath after morning. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. From the hallway, Arya watched silently. She didn't interrupt, just stood there with her arms wrapped around a pillow, oversized socks dragging across the floor. Finally, when the notes faded, she spoke. "Why did you stop playing after they died?" Elliot looked up, his fingers still resting on the keys. "Because the house got too loud with grief," he said, and the silence and music made it worse. She patted closer. "But you're playing now." He nodded slowly. "Because something changed." Arya sat beside him on the bench. She didn't ask for details. She didn't have to. She'd lived it all, seen the mask, the betrayal, the layers of people who smiled while plotting collapse. And yet here they were, both upright, both breathing. That was enough. Later that afternoon, Elliot stood at the front of a midtown conference hall packed with executives, journalists, cybersecurity scholars, and teenage prodigies, with badges that read the Area Initiative Class 1. Behind him was a screen showing a butterfly wings made of code colors, muted but resilient. He adjusted the mic. "When we talk about security," he began, "we usually talk about walls, systems, encryption, defense. But what we don't talk enough about is trust." The room was still. "Trust," he continued, "is the original key card, the back door no one audits, the variable we can't code. And it's how the most sophisticated betrayal I've ever witnessed almost succeeded, not through a breach in hardware, but through a breach in the heart." He paused. "A 10-year-old girl saw it before I did. She didn't need credentials or degrees. She needed courage. She trusted her instinct. And she saved this company. She saved me." The audience turned to Arya, sitting in the front row beside Maria and Reed. She shifted uncomfortably under the attention, but smiled faintly. "She reminded me," Elliot said, "that legacy is not just what we build, but who we protect. And that sometimes the people least expected to lead are the ones already doing it." When the applause ended, Elliot stepped off the stage, not as a CEO, but as a man finally at peace. Outside the conference center, Arya ran ahead to a cluster of scholarship recipients taking selfies beside the butterfly logo. They welcomed her instantly, laughing, inviting. Elliot stood back for a moment, watching her belong. 6 months ago, she had whispered a warning that changed everything. Now she was the reason dozens of kids with quiet genius would be heard. And Neurofold. It was stronger than ever, not just in firewalls or valuation, but in culture. The board had voted to expand transparency protocols, invest in community trust programs, and re-architect their hiring and access structures around the lessons learned from Monarch's infiltration. Trust would no longer be a blind spot. It would be a strength. Back home that evening, Elliot found a note on his desk, written in Arya's uneven, determined handwriting. "Legacy isn't what you leave. It's who remembers why you stayed." It sat beside a framed photo one she had printed herself. It was the two of them standing on the porch after Lauren was taken away. Neither of them had smiled in the picture, but they were both still standing. A few weeks later, Elliot took Arya to the botanical gardens just outside the city. It had become their favorite place, quiet, blooming, honest. They walked the winding paths under blooming archways, past families and school children, and elderly couples moving hand in hand. In the corner of the north wing was a new installation, the Butterfly Sanctuary. Arias' idea, funded by Neurofold. Free to the public, a safe space for something small to transform into something unstoppable. She knelt beside a milkweed patch, watching a monarch flutter between flowers. "They remember," she said, "even when storms blow them off course. They still find their way back." Elliot crouched beside her. "So do we." She smiled, still watching the wings. "Do you think she ever cared?" she asked suddenly. Lauren Elliot didn't answer right away. "Maybe," he said finally. "Maybe in a way that was real until it wasn't. But it doesn't matter now. Because we're free, because we're stronger." She stood and reached for his hand. "Can we go home now?" He looked down at her, this girl who had walked through fire beside him, small and steady, fierce and kind. "Yeah," he said. "Let's go home." As they turned to leave, another monarch landed gently on Arya's shoulder. She didn't move, just smiled and whispered, "Told you they always remember?" And in that moment, framed by trees, by wind, by recovery, Elliot finally understood the breach had taught him caution, the betrayal had taught him war, but Aria had taught him why you fight in the first place, not for vengeance, not even for justice, but for the people who notice the camera no one else sees, for the small voices in big rooms, for legacy, the kind that doesn't need your name on a building, just your hand on someone's shoulder when it matters most. And as the wind rustled the milkweed and the butterflies lifted gently into the afternoon sky, Elliot Grant walked forward, no longer just a founder, now a guardian of something far more lasting than code. Peace, it turned out, was not permanent. It was a pause, a breath between battles. 2 weeks after the garden visit, Elliot Grant was back at Neurofold's Atlanta headquarters. Things were stable on the surface. Aria was thriving in her new mentorship program. Reed had taken over security infrastructure, and the board was finalizing expansion plans for the area initiative. But something didn't sit right. The operation should have ended with Monarch. The press had crowned it a victory. Lauren had testified. Darren had cut a plea deal. Names were named, faces were shamed. Still too much didn't add up. Lauren's communications, while detailed, were limited. The money trail ended in digital fog. The shell companies were clean but oddly structured, and one name kept surfacing again and again in hidden metadata, encryption tags, and internal policy tweaks: Quentin Morrow, a senior board advisor, retired CFO of Beavis Capital, the man who years ago had helped Elliot secure their first Series B funding. He had always been helpful, always gracious, always watching. Elliot sat in the executive vault conference room with Reed and Ellen, Neurofold's COO. The table was lined with printed ledgers, access logs, and digital reconstructions from Arius butterfly sting packet traces. Reed circled something in red. "Look here. This email string isn't just carbon copied tomorrow." He initiated it. The breach protocol they used. That language mirrors a policy proposal he personally submitted to you last spring, embedded inside a finance memo. Elliot narrowed his eyes. He was designing a system that made his own infiltration invisible. Ellen leaned back, visibly shaken. "He served on 3 different audit committees. If he's part of this, everything we thought we repaired is built on rotten foundation." Reed nodded grimly. This wasn't sabotage. This was architecture. They had spent months plugging leaks. Now they were staring at the engineer. That night, Elliot returned to his home office. Aria was curled up on the couch, sketching again, this time a city skyline cracking open from beneath like roots ripping through concrete. She looked up when he entered. "Something's wrong, isn't it?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. "And this time it's not an outsider." Aria sat up straight, alert. "How deep?" "Board level," he said. "Old money, old power." She didn't blink. "Then we built something new." That one sentence sparked a plan, not retaliation, revelation. If Morrow was the top, he wouldn't confess. He was too experienced, too insulated. But Elliot didn't need a confession. He needed to create a scenario where Morrow would expose himself out of greed, out of pride, out of fear. They would play the one card Morrow couldn't resist: control. The next morning, Elliot made an announcement at the executive town hall. "Effective immediately, we're accelerating the public release of our next-gen AI platform, Project Horizon." Gasps. Whispers. Reed raised an eyebrow. Aria, watching from the tech balcony, smiled. Because Project Horizon didn't exist. It was the new bait. They crafted internal documents, prototypes, and demos. Every asset was tagged with custom trace beacons. Only one individual was given selective private access: Quentin Morrow. Within 48 hours, the files were pinged from a remote device in a private IP range linked to an estate in the Hamptons, then from a shell firm in Zurich, then again from a digital server vault registered under Ravenhill Holdings, a financial trust Morrow had denied being part of under oath. Reed's system lit up like a detonation map. They had him, but Elliot didn't want a scandal. He wanted a mirror. So he invited Morrow to dinner, a quiet, high-end rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. Private booth, no press. Just a conversation between a founder and his oldest investor. Morrow arrived on time, impeccably dressed, sipping bourbon like nothing was burning underneath him. "Elliot," he said with a smirk, "good to see you looking well. I hear Project Horizon's ahead of schedule. Elliot met his gaze calm and cold. You tell me. There was a pause. The air stiffened. Then Morrow leaned back. You always were sharp. Pity you were too sentimental to see the real board. You mean the one you puppeteered from the inside? Morrow chuckled, sipping again. You think you've won, but you're late to the game. Do you really believe this ends with me? Monarch was a tool, Lauren was a pawn, Darren was leverage, but the real architecture, that's above even your pay grade, son. You're right, Elliot said. It doesn't end with you. He placed a small recorder on the table. It ends with everything you just said and the 10 surveillance mics planted around this rooftop. Morrow's glass stopped midair. You wouldn't dare. Oh, but I already did. At that moment, Reed and 2 agents from the Department of Justice stepped into the restaurant flanking the exit. Morrow didn't speak. He just laughed, a slow, deliberate, bitter laugh. Then let me give you one last gift, Mr. Grant, he said as they cuffed him. You've just stepped into the light. Enjoy it, because the next enemy won't come through the front door. Elliot watched as Morrow was escorted out. No resistance, no panic, just the measured retreat of a man who had always expected this to happen someday. Later that night, Elliot stood with Aria on the balcony of the estate. The city stretched in quiet waves beyond them. So that's it, she asked. He was Monarch. Elliot shook his head. He was a shadow behind a bigger shadow, and that means we've only cleared part of the rot. She was quiet for a while, then whispered, then we stay ready. He looked down at her. Always. Because the real war wasn't over AI. It wasn't even about data. It was about trust in a world that no longer knew what truth looked like. And the deeper Elliot went, the more he realized justice wasn't a finish line. It was a discipline, one they'd have to carry forward every day, every deal, every conversation, together. 3 days after Quentin Morrow was arrested, Elliot Grant's phone buzzed at 3:17 a.m. It wasn't a number he recognized. But the message was simple. 4 words: check your firewalls. Now. Elliot was already on his feet before the screen dimmed. He rushed to the home office, booted up the secure terminal, and accessed Neurofold's real-time network activity logs. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. Then the anomalies surfaced. Not breaches, not malware. Absences. Entire sections of log data missing. Cleanly, precisely. As if someone hadn't broken in, but had deleted the security footage of themselves never being there. Stealth layer attack, Reed confirmed an hour later inside the command unit. We're not talking brute force hacks anymore. This is evaporative incursion. Someone's using quantum ghosting, replacing server responses with decoy packets in real time. It's like watching a security cam of a robbery that never happened. Elliot's jaw tightened. Who has the resources for that? Reed's eyes narrowed. Only 3 groups I know. 2 are nation-state sponsored, the 3rd they're private. And until now we thought they didn't exist anymore. Elliot didn't speak. He already knew the name. Alabaster Cell, a phantom cybercrime syndicate operating beyond traditional definitions of hacking. No names, no demands, just disruption, collapse, conversion. Rumors said they didn't steal secrets for money, they stole direction. They turned innovation into sabotage, infiltrated AI systems, rewired stock exchanges, bankrupted governments quietly. And now they were in his walls. The timeline matched. Morrow's arrest hadn't been the end. It had been the spark. The exposure of Monarch had fractured something bigger, deeper. Elliot hadn't just burned down one operation, he had kicked open a nest. And the survivors were reorganizing. They're using Horizon as bait, Aria said, spinning in her chair as she mapped the packet behavior. Not the fake prototype, the idea of it. They're seeding rumors, creating ghost code snippets and leaking them into research forums. They're building hype around something we haven't even launched. Elliot looked over her shoulder. Every thread pointed back to a name: Blackfall Ventures, a recently formed capital group operating out of Singapore, connected through layered IP addresses to Zurich, then to a financial node in, of all places, Austin, Texas. Back to where it started. They're trying to reframe the narrative, Elliot muttered. If they make the world believe Horizon came from them, Well, look like the ones who copied, discrediting our future before we even get there. Reputation warfare, Reed said. Smart, effective, and very, very hard to reverse. Elliot stepped away from the screen, breathing hard. Then we don't play defense. He opened a drawer and pulled out a black military-grade flash drive. It was labeled only with a red dot. What's that? Arya asked. The last time I was attacked this quietly, he said I designed a countermeasure that worked more like a virus than a firewall. Not to destroy, to reveal. It embeds a digital signature into the attacker's command chain. One ping is all it takes. He plugged it in, opened the console, and began entering commands with rapid precision. You're going to plant this where Reed asked. In Horizon, Elliot replied. The real one. Reed looked stunned. You're activating it. We've got no choice. They're already impersonating it. If we don't give the world a version that's traceable, they'll own the future. I'd rather fight them with the truth than bury it with silence. The system roared to life. Real-time modeling, predictive algorithms, autonomous countermapping. Horizon wasn't just a program. It was a sentient perimeter, a self-healing, self-tracking AI architecture designed not just to defend, but to understand threat behavior. Arya watched it launch with wide eyes. It's beautiful, Elliot nodded. Now let's see who tries to steal it. By dawn, Horizon was seated across Neurofold's private ecosystem, visible but encrypted, touchable, but poisonous to those who attempted unauthorized access. Elliot made no announcement, no press release. He just waited, and it didn't take long. At 9:21 a.m., an independent researcher in Vancouver posted a white paper claiming to have discovered early Horizon code inside a Blackfall Ventures innovation suite. Within 45 minutes, Horizon pinged its first alert. The researcher's system had attempted to open a dummy test node embedded in the AI core. What he didn't know was that every keystroke he made from that point forward was now mirrored, archived, and traceable. Then came the second ping from inside Neurofold's own East Coast data center. Not again, Arya whispered. But this time, Elliot was ready. They tracked the internal breach to a junior infrastructure contractor, someone hired only 4 weeks earlier. His access patterns were clean, but his terminal was routed through an external cloud relay. He wasn't the attacker. He was the cover, a puppet. Elliot made the call to bring him in, not with hostility, but calm professionalism. In a quiet room, the young man broke within minutes. He didn't know who he was working for, only that he was paid to install a diagnostic packet onto one of the company's load balancers. The payment had come in crypto routed through a wallet address called Cameo ZK. Arya was already scanning it. Cameo ZK isn't a payment portal, she said. It's a handshake server. It's how Alabaster Cell confirms successful infiltration. It doesn't pay people, it recruits them. Reed whistled. They're rebuilding. Faster than I've ever seen. Elliot stared at the monitors, now showing a three-dimensional lattice of breach attempts, foreign redirects, and behavioral mapping clusters. This isn't sabotage anymore, he said. It's warfare. He paused. And it's not just us. They'll go after other companies, startups, hospitals, universities, anything that feeds into AI development. Arya leaned forward. So what do we do? Elliot turned from the monitor, face hardening. We flip the entire model. We make Horizon open source. Reed's head snapped up. You'd give away the crown jewel and give the world a weapon they can use before it's too late. Before Alabaster poisons the next generation of code. We let everyone see it, use it, defend with it. And in doing that, we force them into the light. The room went quiet. It was radical. It was dangerous. But it was the only move left. And Elliot Grant was no longer just protecting a company. He was protecting an ecosystem, a future, a legacy. Arya smiled faintly. Let's light them up. 6 weeks later, the tech world woke to headlines it wasn't prepared for. Neurofold releases Project Horizon as open source founder, says the only way to win is together. Most thought it was a mistake. Some thought it was a publicity stunt. But within 24 hours, developers across 4 continents were downloading the initial Horizon framework, reverse engineering its deep logic structure, and discovering the shocking truth. This wasn't some basic toolkit. It was a living AI perimeter capable of learning attacker behavior in real time, deploying adaptive shields, and leaving forensic fingerprints on every unauthorized contact traceable even through blockchain-shielded relays and post-quantum encryption tunnels. And Elliot Grant had given it away. No strings, no fees. Just one mission: protect the future from people who weaponize silence. Inside Neurofold's executive vault, Elliot stood with Aria and Reed as a wall of monitors tracked global adoption in real time. Red pins dotted the map: universities, nonprofits, startups, independent researchers, government AI labs, all pulling down the code, all linking to the Horizon node map. Reed shook his head. You just gave the world a security system we could have sold for billions. I didn't build it to sell, Elliot said. He turned to Aria. She was tracing connection patterns on a touchscreen, her design, her code embedded inside the framework. And now her work was touching people in Tokyo, Sao Paulo, Nairobi, Austin, Berlin, and counting. They tried to turn truth into a threat, he said. We made it a tool. The move ignited every corner of the industry. Major tech firms scrambled to adopt pieces of Horizon into their infrastructure. Defense contractors began requesting partnerships. Universities rewrote curriculum around the architecture. But not everyone celebrated. 3 days after release, Elliot received a call from someone he hadn't spoken to in years: Harper Vaughn, the former U.S. Chief Cybersecurity Officer. I told you the day you walked away from federal contracts that you'd regret it, her voice said coldly. Now you've handed a digital weapon to every coder on Earth. Elliot didn't flinch. No, he replied. I handed them armor, because the enemy isn't hackers anymore. It's manipulation, deception. People using code not to break walls, but to bend narratives. There was silence. Then you realize you've declared war on organizations that don't technically exist. I didn't declare war, Elliot said calmly. I just made sure they couldn't win it quietly. That night, Aria climbed onto the couch beside him in the study, her tablet in her lap. They're going to come after us, aren't they? She asked. They already are, he replied. But now the world can see them. Aria pulled up a file labeled Legacy Protocol. It was something she'd been working on quietly, long before the Horizon launch. A proposed framework for ethics in AI design, not just how to defend systems, but how to build them with honor. Elliot opened the first page. It read, every line of code shapes a choice, and every choice shapes someone's future. He swallowed hard. She had taken everything they'd been through and turned it into doctrine. Let's publish this too, he said softly. You really think anyone will read it? She asked. No, he said. I think they'll follow it. Weeks passed, then months, and slowly something shifted in the industry. Startups began referencing the Aria protocol during code reviews. Security blogs wrote articles like From Exploits to Ethics: How a 10-Year-Old Changed Cybersecurity. Horizon forks started appearing with names like Area Guard Echo Trace and Monarch Shieldique Iteration, crediting its origins back to the same open-source node, the girl who saw the first camera. In time, lawmakers began consulting Neurofold's new ethics and threat foresight team co-led by Aria and Reed. Elliot stayed behind the scenes, not because he was hiding, but because he believed passing the torch meant stepping away from the fire. Aria became the voice, not loud, not flashy, just quietly relentless. And in a world of surveillance, deception, and exploitation, her quiet became a revolution. 1 year after Project Horizon went public, the United Nations Council on Digital Sovereignty invited Aria to keynote their global tech accord. She stood on stage wearing a small blazer, 2 sizes too big, her hair in braids, her voice soft but firm. The world doesn't need perfect code, she said. It needs honest architects. People who remember that behind every algorithm is a person trying to be seen, trying to be safe. The room was silent, then standing, a full ovation. Back home, Elliot watched the broadcast from the porch of their estate. His hand wrapped around a mug of coffee, eyes a little misty. He didn't interrupt her moment. He just smiled, because this wasn't his story anymore. It was hers. Later that night, Aria returned to the study and dropped a small envelope on his desk. What's this? He asked. A gift, she said. He opened it. Inside was a hand-drawn sketch of a butterfly, its wings made of tiny ones and zeros, wrapped around the word trust. You once told me trust was the biggest vulnerability in a system, she said. He nodded slowly. She grinned. Now, it's the strongest feature. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire flicker. Outside, the digital war raged on. But inside, there was peace. Not because the fight was over, but because they had changed the battlefield. And in doing so, they'd made sure that the next Arya would never have to whisper into a broken room again. She would be heard, out loud, and the world would be ready to listen. A year after the launch of Horizon and the publication of the Arya Protocol, something unexpected began to happen. People stopped asking who was behind it and started asking how to carry it forward. Elliot Grant had become a reluctant legend in industry myth, for many a cautionary tale for others. He rarely appeared at conferences anymore. He politely declined think tanks' interviews and government panels. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he believed the best systems didn't need the architect in the room. They needed inheritance. He now worked quietly from a converted barn behind the estate, where the walls were covered in whiteboards and chalk slates and printouts held up by magnets. Arya often joined him there. Now 12, her ideas sharper than some of his former engineers, her sketches more detailed, more systemic. One morning she came in carrying a wrapped package and dropped it on the table. "What's this?" Elliot asked. "Your retirement gift," she replied with a smirk. He raised an eyebrow. "I didn't retire." "You did," she said. "From leading. You passed the torch, remember." He unwrapped the package slowly. Inside was a black metal Devicino screen, no lights, just a single fingerprint reader on its surface. On the back, engraved into the casing, were 3 words, "Silent Guardian Node." "What is this?" he asked, eyes narrowing. She sat beside him, hands folded. "It's a zero-access archive vault, quantum encrypted, decentralized verification. It holds only one thing, a digital oath." Elliot said nothing. Arya continued. "It's not meant to be opened unless the system fails. If the Arya protocol is ever corrupted, if someone tries to weaponize it, twist it, turn Horizon into a surveillance tool instead of a shield, this node wakes up." She reached into her pocket and slid over a second device. Identical, except this one had his initials on it. "It won't activate unless both signatures verify it," she said. "Yours and mine." Elliot stared at her, heart caught somewhere between awe and grief. "You built a fail-safe for trust." She nodded. "You understand what that means? That one day," she said, "we might need to remind the world what this was all supposed to stand for." He looked down at the node again. No ports, no cloud, no tether. It was memory, buried in silence, waiting to speak only when truth was in danger. "I didn't think it lived long enough to be proud of the future," he whispered. Arya smiled. "You didn't build the future. You just cleared the way." They placed the devices side by side on the old wood desk. Outside, the world kept moving. News cycles spinning, markets dancing, innovations accelerating. But here in this little room, something rare was happening. They weren't just protecting what had been built. They were protecting why it had been built. The Arya protocol was already integrated across hundreds of major platforms. It governed authentication systems in hospitals. It secured humanitarian blockchain registries. It trained algorithms in AI ethics modules across North America and Europe. The world didn't just adopt it, they entrusted it. And that came with weight. One afternoon, a group of teenagers from a summer AI camp visited the estate as part of a pilot mentorship program. Arya led the tour, walking them through the study, the code lab, and finally to the glass case mound in the center of the studio. Inside was the first prototype tablet where Arya had run the scan that detected Lauren's hidden camera. One of the students, a shy girl with braces and blue hair, asked quietly, "Were you scared when you told Mr. Grant?" Arya paused. "I was," she said, "but I wasn't scared of being wrong. I was scared I'd be right and no one would believe me." The room was silent. Then Elliot stepped in from the hallway. "But she spoke anyway," he added. "And because of that, we rebuilt an entire world." The girl smiled. That night, Elliot and Arya sat on the porch sipping cocoa, listening to the distant hum of cicadas. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't said anything?" he asked. "All the time," she said. "And then I remember the scariest silence isn't the kind you hear. It's the kind you live in." He nodded slowly. "Then I guess we build until there's no room left for silence." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a sketchbook. I've been thinking about that too. We can protect every home or school or server on Earth. But what if we could protect every voice? Elliot leaned in. She flipped the page. Her idea was radical, a distributed identity verifier, not just for systems, but for people. A way for whistleblowers, dissidents, journalists, and students to submit warnings, ideas, and discoveries without fear of being ignored, erased, or punished. Anonymous until verified, immutable once authenticated. She called it Echo Lock, a voice that would never vanish, even if the speaker did. Elliot looked up at her stunned. You just built the immune system of free expression? She shrugged. I had a good teacher. And so, under the stars that night, the next project began. Not to fight enemies, not to stop breaches, but to protect what was most vulnerable in any system, the truth whispered by someone too small to be heard, until someone chooses to listen. And this time, the world was finally ready, because Aria Grant had made sure of it. Years passed, not in fanfare but in fragments, lines of code, letters in journals, sketches tucked into binders, moments shared across midnight keyboards and early morning calls. The world didn't stop moving, but it remembered, and what it remembered was a whisper. The first whisper came from a little girl who noticed a blink behind a painting. The second came from a man who chose to believe her. And the third, louder, sharper, undeniable, came from what they built together. Echolock had gone live 3 years after Horizon's open source launch. It didn't look like a revolution. No press event, no marketing blitz. Just a quiet file dropped into developer communities under one line of text. Some voices should never be silenced. Within months, journalists were using it to submit evidence of war crimes in dark zones. Medical interns used it to safely report negligence inside privatized hospitals. Students from countries where free speech was still a rumor began using it to ask real questions without fear. They were all echoes, but for the first time in history, the world heard them clearly. At the heart of it all, Aria remained the quiet nucleus. She never sought fame. She didn't need to. Her work pulsed in every system that honored dignity, every firewall that protected data and intent. Every platform that finally understood security wasn't about control. It was about respect. One autumn evening, Elliot sat alone in the garden behind the estate. His beard was a little grayer now, his eyes softer. In front of him sat a weathered laptop phone of the last offline machines left in the barn studio. He opened a folder marked Legacy Internal Only Voice.log and he clicked Record. If you're hearing this, I'm gone, not in tragedy, in peace. I want you to know something about how all this started. It didn't begin with a system. It began with a child. She didn't ask permission. She didn't wait to be important. She just knew something was wrong, and she said it. Not loudly, just clearly. He paused, breathing in the soft wind rustling the trees. Everything you're building now, Echolock Horizon V3, the ARIA Institutes in Ghana, in New Zealand, it exists because one voice didn't fold. Not under pressure, not under doubt, and never under silence. If you're inheriting this work, don't just protect what we build, protect how we build it. The world doesn't need more cleverness. It needs clarity. Be brave enough to ask questions no one else hears. And always, always listen when the quiet ones speak. He clicked Save, then Encrypt, then Archive. That file now sits in the center of the Silent Guardian node stored deep in a zero-access vault beneath a neutral ethics council in Switzerland. No one can open it without both keys, Arias, and whoever she chooses to succeed her. She's 22 now, standing in a lecture hall at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, not as a student, but as a visiting chair of cyber conscience engineering. Her lectures aren't about code structure or architecture. They're about accountability, the kind that makes an engineer pause before clicking deploy, the kind that makes a CEO ask what's the human cost of this algorithm. She teaches not from notes but from experience, from history, from scars, and she ends every session the same way: systems don't save people. People save people. We just build the systems that help them do it. Behind her, etched into the wall of her lab, is a plaque. It's not gold, not marble, just brushed steel. It reads, Aria Grant Initiative for Ethical Technology. in memory of the whisper that rebuilt the world. Visitors often ask if it's named after her. She always smiles and says no. It's named after who I was, before anyone believed I was right. And somewhere far from lecture halls and boardrooms in a quiet cabin overlooking the Pacific Ocean, a child is sitting at a table. They're holding a tablet, reading about a girl who scanned a wall, who warned someone she loved, who changed everything. The child looks up at their mother and asks, "Is this story real?" The mother smiles, "As real as it gets." "Do you think I'd be brave like her?" "I think," she says, "you already are." Outside, the sea whispers against the rocks. The stars blink unblinking, and the story continues. Not on screens, not in headlines, but in the hands of every person who ever dared to ask a hard question and never stopped looking for the truth beneath the silence. If this story moved you even half as much as it moved us while telling it, then take a moment to reflect on the courage it takes to speak up when no one else is listening. Arya didn't have power. She didn't have a platform. She had instinct and the quiet bravery to act on it. And Elliot, he chose to believe the smallest voice in the room when doing so could have cost him everything. That's the kind of world we need more of. A world where truth matters, where trust is earned, where silence doesn't win. So tell us, what would you have done if you were in Elliot's place? Or better yet, have you ever ignored a whisper that turned out to be right? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you believe Arya's story deserves to be heard, share this video with someone who still believes in doing the right thing even when it's hard. And hey, if you like this story, leave a comment with the number 1. It's simple, it's small, but sometimes the smallest gestures echo the loudest.